Of that 2.5 million, 180,000 were going to charter schools. Now you had 4,000 schools, and you had only 38 failing schools. Now I don't want any failing schools, but you had 38. How many of those do you think were charter? 18 out of 38 of the failing schools were charter schools. And you only had 180,000 kids in those schools versus out of the 2.5 million. So that makes my point about you have to have the same accountability for all of them with our tax dollars. That's how I feel about it.
Out of the percentage you mentioned, how many charter schools are in existence during that time period?
How many?
Yes, how many? 200.
It's about, well, it's 180,000 kids. So, I mean, those are pretty small schools. So, South Florida has the most of the charter schools, and a lot of them open up in poor neighborhoods, unfortunately, without this accountability. So 2 years later, when the school closes, those children come back into the public school, and the public school is responsible for taking care of the kids.
So how good the public schools here versus the charter schools? In other words,
How what?
how good the public schools versus the charter schools? In other words, one of the problems we run into in public schools is there's a very strong teachers union, and that has stood in the way of making effective changes. How do you attempt to resolve that?
Well, I don't agree with the premise that they necessarily stopped us from making changes, because I can tell you that my daughter happens to be a school board member in Broward, and they make the changes that they need to make, and they change administrations, and they, as I said, there are 5 turnaround models that can be used by any school district to fix a failing school. And let me tell you, if they're not doing it, then the state needs to come in, Department of Education, and make sure that they are. Because I don't want any failing schools. I don't want a public one or a charter school. We have no control over the private ones. Those are different.
In relationship to other counties or states, how do we rank?
How do we rank it?
How do we rank, in other words, versus our elementary, our middle schools, our high schools? Where does the state or county rank compared to others?
With regard to what? I mean, if they're...
Education, in other words, mean the top 10, the bottom 20.
No, that's in funding.
No.
That's in funding. Actually, we rank higher. We rank not badly in some of the studies, as far as just how much better we would rank if we invested properly in our public schools. I don't have the rankings with me, but I know that it's not down in the 40s. It's up higher than that. But what I'm saying to you is, we have to make sure that for our tax dollars, everybody's accountable, whether you're a charter school or a traditional public school.
I agree.
Okay.
Could you speak to the issue of FCATs and the kind of the growing kind of debacle in our schools where teachers are forced into teaching the test, and if you go into schools, you'll hear teachers talking about it as an abject failure. Everything is geared towards the FCAT, and it doesn't seem to be working, and yet there's an awful lot of money going on.
Well, let me tell you, that's all part of the educational reform that started under Jeb Bush. The A-plus plan, which was the testing and the rating of the schools based on the testing. And, I have been opposed to that. That is not good education as far as, your focus on curriculum needs to be broad-based, well-balanced, not teaching to a test. My granddaughter was just telling me, she's a sophomore at Cypress Bay High School, and she said, Grandma, did you realize that we didn't learn anything, we didn't do anything the entire month of school? Wow. And I said, what do you mean? And she's telling me, well, when the test is over, that's it. And this is like one of the #1 high schools in the state. So, the test is a real issue. Let me tell you, we tried to get the legislature to change it. The Democrats did, and we couldn't get them, to get off of that. Now, there are a lot of states that are beginning to realize that this is not the way to educate children. Even Texas, which was like one of the first states for the testing, high-stakes testing, they actually had a a bill 2 years ago. It passed just the first committee and then it disappeared. But it was to eliminate all funding for high stakes testing. So there's a lot of money that goes into high stakes testing. So they eliminated it, but then they ended up putting it back. But let me tell you what the problem is. You know, we want to get away from high stakes testing. These end of course exams and the kind of exams we're moving to are no better. As a matter of fact, they may end up being worse because there are more tests than there even were with the FCAT. So that's something that I think the next governor is going to have to really look at as Common Core, you know, comes in and we begin to look at these end of course exams. Because we can't, you know, teachers, I was at the Palm Beach teacher training this past year, and I can't tell you how many teachers walked up to me and said, you know what, this is my last year of teaching. Because they just can't handle it anymore. Between the paperwork and the testing and not being able to be creative and innovative with their classrooms and do the things that they know that they've been trained, you know, to do to give kids a well-balanced education. So that high stakes testing.
Yeah, I was a high school teacher for 25 years and northeast down to Florida. My last job, wonderful, Suncoast High School. Still a problem with teaching to the test there, and I quit. You know, to take a job right now, a fraction of the amount, you know, because I didn't want to be in that environment anymore. You know, so you've got an incredible thing going on. You know, you want credentialed teachers, they're not going to go into that environment and they will not stay in that environment.
I wanted to just say that I'm from the New York State School System, and they taught for the test. We had regents at the end of a 2-year course, or a 3-year course, or a 4-year course. And we all studied, the teachers taught, according to the curriculum that would prepare us for these tests. Now, if we got the proper grades and the proper cue, we would go on to college, and we would be able to have a college degree because we were able to follow the curriculum that was followed. We had Regents review classes constantly. I don't think that's that bad. However, what I object to is that the Florida system is giving empty schoolrooms and empty floors in their public schools to the charter school, allowing them to come in and utilize the empty spaces. We paid for that with our taxpayer dollars, and the charter schools are taking advantage of this. They're making money, and our students are losing out.
Well, actually, there was a piece of legislation which was not passed that allowed charter schools to do that, but it was not passed that they could come in and take empty spaces in our schools. So I don't believe that that's happening right now, but be that as it may, you know, charter schools are public schools. That's what is the difference between the private and the charter. So I'm not in favor of them coming in and taking over the schools, but I'm also in favor of having if they have their own school, known as school choice, it needs to be up to the standards and have the accountability. That's all. Yeah, Tom?
Going back about 25 years ago, we had this interesting discussion in the legislature as to whether or not we were going to be the top quartile or the top 10% in education accomplishment. Chartered, public, private, didn't matter. For our kids, going to be in the upper quartile, or are we going to be at the upper 10%? That was the debate. Since then, I haven't heard a lot of debate about where we're going to be. So, if you're governor, are we going to be the best nation in the country in terms of educational accomplishment, or something less than that?
Well, I would hope we would be the best in the top 10%, because that is about the future of our children. And there's nothing more important than investing in education. So we're not doing that in this state. And when we talk about jobs in the economy, it all goes back to education. So, you know, to me, when I look at the Rick Scott, who cut $1.3 billion in education the first year he came in, you know, and then, you know, tried to say he put it all back the next year, didn't put it all back, he put some back. But, you know, if you're 48th in the nation, you can't be, you know, in that top 10%. It just doesn't work that way. You can't pay your teachers enough. We're anywhere from, $6,000 to $10,000 less as far as paying teachers than our neighbors to the north in Georgia. Teachers go in Tallahassee, live in Tallahassee, they drive to Georgia, and they get, thousands of dollars more. So we're losing the best and the brightest, and why should we do that? I mean, I feel if Georgia can do that, and some of the other southern states that don't have, the kind of resources that we have in this state, but part of it is you have to be willing to, to invest and to say, this governor talked about, proudly, that he cut taxes 24 times last year, 24 different things. Well, you know what? You're not going to have you're not going to be in the top 10%, if that's the mentality, because you need to have the money to pay for that, and you can get it by closing the loopholes that we have in our tax structure. You know that we have 75% of our tax base is sales tax. Now, we exempt more sales tax than we take in, more items than we take in. Even Republican John McKay, who was Senate President, he wanted a review of all of that because the lobbyists come there and they, on behalf of their clients, and get things exempted. Well, some things maybe it's right for them to be exempted and maybe not, but there should be a whole review, and we could pick up probably, they're saying something like maybe, $20 billion if we had a review of that. If we close some of the other loopholes that exist that create a very unfair and inequitable tax structure in the state of Florida. You have corporations that don't have to pay their corporate income tax, whereas sometimes the person next door has to, but they don't. It's called combined reporting. Anybody that does business in Florida should pay their fair share of that. You don't have a state income tax. You're not going to have a state income tax. But we have a small corporate tax. And I'm really very tired. It's, the best interests of people. That's what's important, not the best interests of corporations. And over the last, 10 years, I can think of, it's been the best interests of corporations.
So can I take that as a yes, you would try to make Florida?
I said yes. That is a yes. I said yes. I said yes. Yes.
Okay, so we're on the hot topic of education, and I have 2 children, no longer finished public school. Are you willing, when you go into the state, to clean house? Because both of my children did private and public. I have a daughter who absolutely was pushed through, is not ready for college classes. I don't understand, she took the FCAT. There's like every loophole in the world for the FCAT they're waiting for the end of course exams to do, that whether they fail or they can take it 15 times, they're still going to push those things through. Are you going to clean house in Tallahassee to make sure that stops happening? Because that affects all of us. Forget my kids, but who's going to take care of us when we're old? If these kids aren't educated, they're not taught. And unfortunately, they are the ones that are being cheated over and over again. I have a daughter who can't do algebra. She's not a stupid girl. She's just been pushed through. Are you going to clean up? I mean,
supposedly you can't do that with the FCAT.
yeah, and that's
So it's
that is
interesting that
so
that's what
wrong.
you're
My
saying.
daughter's a
Yeah.
senior, she just finished. Unfortunately, she won't be accepted into the public school university system because she has not scored high enough on her math, which follows you through, and then on her SATs and ACTs. She needs another point or so she now no longer qualifies for, what is it? And she's a very intelligent young woman, and stellar student. The honor teachers want her in her class, and she's contributing. But she did not do well on her, I can vouch for it. I go in, I ask for more help, it's not their fault. But I want, they get them prepped and ready for them, and she's not the only one. I mean, so many of her friends are failing, and these are student government kids. These are unbelievably bright children. We live in a nice area. I want to know, if you're going to clean up there. I'll get all my friends behind you if you love. Our kids are going to school now. It doesn't matter.
We're going to clean it up, right?
It's just everything. They don't get their FCAT score back till 5 days before school starts.
Right. Look, there are a lot of issues, and, you know, and there are individual issues here. But, you know, the overall thing is you have to have a plan, and you have to bring all the stakeholders to the table. And this is what has not happened here. Whether it's, you know, how you deal with the FCATs, how you deal with children who are not doing as well as they should, teacher evaluation. You know, you can't expect people to, this is part of the problem right now where we have a broken accountability system here in the state of Florida. You cannot expect teachers, you know, to be happy about the fact that every year, the evaluation, how they're evaluated changes. And sometimes in the middle of the year. And that affects the child's education as far as I'm concerned. Because they don't know what they're supposed to be teaching. And that is a problem. So we've got to get that all straightened out. This governor had a summit this past year. He called the summit on a Thursday. I don't know if you remember reading this. He called the summit on a Thursday for a Monday. I thought there was a lot of preparation in that summit, and there were more legislators at the summit than educators, and that right there is an issue. You need to have the professionals there that can listen to people like you, hear what you're saying, and figure out how to fix those problems. So that's what we do.
You don't know anybody anything in Tallahassee, you don't mind cleaning house.
I don't know anybody anything in Tallahassee. Not that I ever did, but especially after this campaign. Hard work, going to the voters, that's who I'm responsible to. The voters, yeah, in the back, yeah.
Can you, for some people who don't know, can you explain the whole, the Governor Scott thing with the teachers, the $3,000 pay raise and how that works and everything?
Can I explain?
Yeah.
Not really. Not really. They, you know.
Well, it's something that makes them look better for like.
Yeah, but it doesn't really.
I just want you to explain it to.
Well, it doesn't really make them look better. I mean, the teachers don't really think that happened, and they know it didn't happen in many cases. And in addition, what happened was that the legislature expanded who got the increases, which I happen to agree with that. I wasn't in the legislature at that moment, but I think that everybody that's part of the school family needs to participate when there's an increase. So, you know, you have people that are working in the school in other capacities, not just teachers. They need to be part. They're part of the school family. So what happened was it was expanded. So the raises were not the amount that was suggested in the first place because it had to be spread out. It was the same amount of money. The money wasn't increased. It had to be spread out among more people. So it wasn't really that. And then you had school districts that were having lots of issues with it. Now I think most of the districts have given out some kind of raise. But it's not a raise actually. It's actually a bonus type thing. It's not something that they get every single year, my understanding is. So, and this is what you need to get it every year. It needs to become a part of your base pay. That's what it needs to be. Otherwise, you know, we're not really doing the right thing. Yeah.
Can you say something about two things? Voter rights in our state. I'm a poll worker. Every time there's an election, I'm here. And the other thing has to do with women's right to choose, which had this big blow this week from the Supreme Court. And, you know, Rachel Maddow made a big point last night of showing us the area around the Supreme Court where you can't demonstrate because the judges don't want to be in danger, and the employees are not doing it for us.
Right, but it's okay for the women to be harassed, right?
Looking for health care.
Right. Let me go back a little bit because I really didn't. I kind of missed this one issue which I always talk about, and that's women's rights. The third bill of which I'm very proud, when I was the Democratic leader, that I was able to block. For the first time in many years, in 2012, there was not one single bill that restricted women's reproductive rights that made it to the floor of the Senate. Not one. And it was the only time in many years. As a matter of fact, last year they went right back at it again and had a bill that changes the viability standards. It's actually unconstitutional. I mean, you know, we do have Roe v. Wade, It's amazing, 41 years, I was up there with Patricia Ireland, who's a former national president of NOW, and Ann Gannon from here, as a dear friend and supporter. We went up to have a rally in Tallahassee for the 41st anniversary of Roe. It's one of the reasons why I believe we need a strong pro-choice woman governor, because we need someone who will any legislation that comes in there and puts government interference in the way of women's reproductive rights. And this thing with the barriers, the 35 barriers, is very dangerous now. I mean, you are really saying you're putting women in jeopardy. And it's so hard for those of us who've worked so many years, to protect women's rights, women's health care and reproductive rights, and to see it being undermined, and this war on women that just continues on and on and on. So, one of the ways in this state is two things. One is to keep the Republicans from getting a 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate, which we now have. They don't have a 2/3 majority, so that when a pro-choice Democratic woman governor gets into the office and vetoes one of these bills, the veto will not be overridden, and that's what we need here.
Yes. Yes, I'm interested in community buildings, specifically to address green issues, and more specifically, I'm interested in community gardens. Community gardens reduce crime, they increase nutrition, they address food justice issues, and in the state of Florida, for example, there's no Florida Community Garden Association even. What would you do to support community greening and community gardens?
Well, it happens, the only place I really have been to one is in Jacksonville. They happen to have a wonderful Dorothy Hughes, she's kind of the mother of it up there. And I think, it's pretty much an individual community, issue in terms of, the same thing as many of the other programs in communities. But I think that certainly the legislature could take a look at, and as the governor, I could, promote that to create a community association. We have associations for, mental health, substance abuse, statewide, domestic violence. There's no reason why there could not be one for community gardens, and right. It's very important, and people don't. I don't think they know enough about it.
Well, there are a number of things at the state level you could do for legislation that would supersede some of the local laws, like HOA laws, or that would assist with that. But also the education level, the community organizing, participating in National Community Garden Association, of which I'm fairly active, all of which would promote community gardens, identifying public lands where you could have community gardens.
Yes.
I have a question as a state employee. When this legislature got in and started cutting budgets and started cutting benefits, it's been very demoralizing, particularly these gigantic layoffs that we had in 2011. I was wondering if you get to be governor, or rather when you get to be governor, what are your intentions as far as state employee benefits?
I have, ever since I've been in the legislature, and certainly when I was the Democratic leader, a lot of these attacks came with regard to public employees, and we were able to stop a couple of things. We didn't have, as I said, we didn't have enough votes, to really block that, but we were able to stop they wanted to take away the dues deduction, which we were able to stop. The defined benefit plan, which I support the defined benefit plan. And I will tell you, the reason is, number one, this attack on it, that it is one of the best funded plans in the country. When you look at it, it is like one of the top 5 in the nation. It's used as a model for other states. And now we have these attacks. Listen, when Jeb Bush, if you remember, when he first came into office, one of his statements was he wanted to empty out the office buildings in Tallahassee and of public employees. And unfortunately, he was successful to some degree. And in a lot of areas, we can see that now. You know, even when you look at, when I mentioned child welfare, and you look at protective investigation, and you look at the caseloads, you know, yeah, those are public employees. And we need to have a Child Welfare of America standard of caseloads and not have someone having 20 or more children to be looking after because they're not going to be able to handle it.
And they have
So, and dreadful salaries, and that's another thing, when people talk about the benefits, you know, a lot of times people are promised, because the municipalities can't, and counties, they can't give increases, so they promise it on the back end. So I found that really very, you know, dishonest, actually, that you didn't give it on the front end, and now you want to take it away on the back end. That's not right. So I was, you know, maintain my support of it, and as I said, it's, you know, it is one of the best in the nation, and this argument that it's not funded, and it's going to bankrupt us, and whatever, it's just not, the facts don't bear that out.
Yeah, I'd like to, I'm new to Florida, as I said, I'd like to ask you about the effect of, like, with sober houses. There seems to be a profusion of these sober houses in some of the coastal communities here, at least in Palm Beach County. I think Delray and Lake Worth. And from my understanding, there's very little regulation of these sober houses.
I think that's what the neighborhoods object to. In my experience in the legislature, when they try to actually regulate the sober houses, a couple of the state senators several years ago tried to do that, and they were not able. They were not able to do that. But I think that seems, anything I've read, it's that this lack of regulation and this happens with all kinds of programs that are put into neighborhoods. You know, people are always nervous about whether it's a group home for children or developmentally disabled, or, you know, in this case, the sober houses. So they're, I think, you know, I have no problem with them being there as long as there are, you know, regulations and they fit into the, you know, neighborhood and people know what's there. So I don't know if that's, you know, if there's anything else that's an issue. I certainly would want to, you know, learn about it, because I just don't think that we've been able to do anything in the legislature with regard to the sober houses. There just always seems to be so much conflict when a bill comes out with regard to them.
And who are they interested in preventing the bill from?
Sorry?
Are there organized interests, special interests, stopping the bill from getting to the governor to sign?
You know, my understanding is it's more the neighborhoods that have issues with